Salams, hello and good morning. My name is Jawad Ahmed Fareed and it's time to have a heart-to-heart chat about go-to-market or GTM for short. In the product and startup world, we normally run into this term or concept at about the time when a product is done. Someone from the product, strategy, technology, development or leadership team comes around and says, product is done, we've spent the last 6 months producing something which is very nice. We're very happy with the output, the end result. It's now time to get this product in front of customers, to get them to try it, ideally buy it, and if you're lucky, even generate revenues from it. Question is, how do you go about doing this? Now, to be fair, GTM is not one concept. Go-to-market is not one concept. It's actually a collection of concepts. The first of those core concepts is the fact that GTM is not one and done. It's not a single event. It's actually a process. It's a sequence of steps. Those sequence of steps are based on an understanding of the product life cycles. Products behave, follow a certain arc. They are introduced, they are launched, they grow, they get traction, and they ultimately hit the mainstream market and then they decline. And that's the high level life cycle. So these are the first two concepts. But beyond these two concepts, I think the next most important topic that we need to understand really well to do a good job with the GTM strategy is to understand who is this product meant for and how or why was that specific segment selected. Because if we understand this, then we can answer the next three set of questions. The first question is, how do we get this segment to trust the work that we've done, trust our product enough to a point where they're willing to try it. Getting to customer trial is often a series of experimentations. We formulate a thesis, we make assumptions, we validate them. If the thesis is correct, if the assumptions are valid, then the customer gets to try the product. If the product is decent, if it's a good fit with whatever need or pain or challenges or issues the customer is facing, then the customer is happy to buy it. And once we've conducted a sequence or a series of these trials, we feel confident enough that we can get the product to launch. These, in essence, are the 6 concepts we want to focus on a GTM strategy. So let's take a deep dive into these 6 concepts, starting off with the concept of a product life cycle. Typically, a product life cycle is also known as the S-curve. It's known as the S-curve because the shape that this graph or this chart represents. A product starts at the beginning, is launched, and it gets traction and ultimately stabilizes. So the shape of this curve looks like an S, and hence the term S-curve. Now, to be fair, this is actually not one curve, this is actually 3 separate curves. The first curve, the very first part of the curve is segment A or phase A of the product life cycle. In this specific piece, we walk through our journey from startup to launch. Second phase is where we try and figure out how to escalate, how to add growth and traction to a model, and let's just call this phase B. A third phase is when the product hits mainstream market and both sales as well as demand stabilizes and mature. There's a fourth stage, a final stage that we're not concerned with as much on the GTM side, and that focuses on decline. So if I were to look at the 4 keywords for the 4 phases that we've looked at, phase A is essentially focused on discovery. How do we get more customers to find, to try and work with our product? The second phase, B, is focused on growth. The third phase is focused on getting to the mainstream market and looking at mainstream demand. The final phase is focused on decline. These are the 4 phases of the product life cycle that we're interested in. For a GTM strategy, the first question that we have to answer is, who is our first customer? The first customer that's going to try a product. This customer generally comes from segment 0. Think about this for a second. You're a startup. Nobody knows you. You have no background. You have no history. You have no traction. You have no recognition, no brand name in the market that you're just about to step into. What kind of a person would give you a shot? Would try a product? Would risk trying a product from a no-name team with no background and history or track record? That person, that segment is segment 0. In a lot of instances, when we sit down and talk to product teams, most product teams have done their groundwork and they have something called an ideal customer profile. An ideal customer profile represents the perfect customer, the customer that you've designed this product for. But one of the key things that we want to focus on, that we want to identify, and that we want to emphasize in our GTM strategy or in our thinking around our GTM model is this. The ideal customer profile that we've created for the product when we started thinking about the product is actually going to be very different from the profile of the customers in segment 0. If it's the same, then you've done a lot of good work, and that basically shows a lot of maturity on your part. But in most instances, when you think of ideal customer profile, the profile that we define is actually the profile of the product when it has reached maturity. The profile of the product when it is in original startup launch discovery stages is very different from the profile of the product that has reached maturity. And hence the profile of customers is very different from the profile of customers that are likely to try it in the initial stages. Ensuring, identifying that you have a good understanding of what your segment 0 looks like is a key part. It's also possible for you to say or think about the fact that maybe segment 0 is not the right profile, but certainly segment 1 is the right profile. Once your product has been discovered, once people have tried it, once you have testimonials, once you have social proof, it's easier to add growth and traction. You're no longer a no-name. You're no longer a team that has no background, history, or track record in the field. You have a few customers. Those customers have tried your product. Those customers can act as references. It's easier to sell to segment 1. This is a different profile of a customer. It's still different from the profile of customers who will try a mature product, but it is not the same. It's not as small as your segment 0 customers. So if we take this conversation forward and summarize what the concept of GTM is, just based on the first discussion around life cycle, we find that the primary question that we're trying to answer is in two parts. First part, how do we get a product in front of our customers? Second question, how do we convince them to try, and here's the key part, and buy it? So two questions, or one question with two parts. How do we get a product in front of our customers, and how do we convince the same customers to try and buy the product? Now, in the beginning, right at the start, I said that this generally represents a series of experiments. Try and buy. How do we get customers to try and buy? A series of experiments. Those experiments are going to be a function of three dimensions. Product features. What are the product features customers are likely to buy? Which customers? The customers that we've designed this product for, which represent the segment that we selected for. And what is the price point or the value point at which we want to compete? If you bring these three dimensions together, you'll find that you actually have a lot of choices. Experimentation is a function of trying one of these shades and seeing whether the shade works or doesn't work. If it doesn't work, you move on to the next one. So if this works, this is great. If this doesn't work, that's all right. You can try the next one. If this works, that's great. Doesn't work, try the next one. This works, this is great. Doesn't work, try the next one, and so on and so forth, till you get to the shade that works, that gets traction, that customers are happy to try and buy. Which then brings us to our next concept. Next concept is segment 0. What do customers in segment 0 look like? Who are these customers? What are their attributes? Assume, even for mature teams this happens on a regular basis, but assume that you're a green team. This is your first product launch. You've never done a product launch before. You've read all the books, the textbook that exist on product life cycle, on segment selection. You understand how products are focused and centered around the life arc of a customer, and you've defined, as we said earlier, an ideal customer profile. So we know a few things, right? Based on the discussion that we've had earlier, we know a few things. We know that the ideal customer profile is most likely going to be different from the profile of a customer in segment 0. But what is going to be the profile of a customer in segment 0? Think about this for a second. Think of a very simple product. Let's say you've designed a product that focuses on ad monetization and optimization. So you have a product for customers who use digital platforms to sell their products, and they run a series of ad campaigns on all media properties that exist. Some of them are Google ads, some of them are Facebook ads, some of them are Insta ads, some of them are LinkedIn ads. And you've got a product a very nice product that you've built for customers who advertise online to sell their products that optimizes ad spend, yield, and conversion. That's the concept, right? So let's say your ideal customer profile is a customer that spends close to about $100,000 a year or $100,000 a month on digital ad spend. And your business model is very simple. You say, okay, we'll give you a free trial. You try the product. Depending on how much we add to your conversion yield, we'll charge you a fee as a percentage of the incremental, the marginal, the additional, the new conversion that our platform helps you generate. So from a structure perspective, you'd say, oh, this is a no-brainer, right? You'd say, so from a product perspective, when you think in terms of marketing and proposing and suggesting this to a customer, your ideal customer profile, you're saying you spend about $100,000 a month or a year on digital advertising, and that $100,000 generates about $300,000 in sales for you. And we're confident, we are sure that we can take this $300,000 to $500,000. And this is a no-risk, no-brainer product for you, because what we'll do is, if we generate only $300,000 in sales for you, we won't charge you any fee at all. But if we generate $500,000 in sales for you based on the same ad spend, we'll just take a small fee, which will be a percentage of the difference between the $500,000 that we help you generate and the $3 that you were already generating. So your incremental expense is only going to be a function of the incremental sales that we've generated on your behalf, right? Simple product, simple concept. But think about this for a second. You have zero background or history or track record in that specific field. When a customer takes their $100,000 of ad spend and moves it to your platform, what happens if he generates no sales at all? You believe and you think that you can bump up his sales from the current $300K to $500,000. You believe in that, right? But there is no history, there's no track record. You've never spent $100,000 on your platform to see whether you'd get the same step up in sales. So what happens if you fail to deliver on that promise? Now, from your perspective, you're saying there is no risk, because if we don't deliver on that promise, you don't have to pay us anything. But how does the customer explain the fact that they moved $100,000 in ad spend, which would have normally generated $300,000 in sales, but rather than generating that $300,000 in sales, they generated zero because your platform did not work? There is that risk. How do you de-risk that conversation? Your ideal customer profile may be a customer that spends $100,000 in digital ad spend, but that ideal customer profile may not be willing to take a risk or make a bet on an unknown, no history, no background, no track record company. Your segment 0 customer will most likely share the same attributes that you have. Be a customer that has limited spend, limited budget, limited availability of funds, very high appetite for taking risk, very high appetite for working with somebody who has no background or track record in history. Why? Because that is all that they can afford. If you're a rinky-dinky little startup, there's a reasonable chance that your segment 0 customer is also going to be a rinky-dinky little startup, and that then needs to reflect in how you onboard them and how you price your product for them. Compare this to segment 1. A segment 1 customer comes into the picture when you already have a segment 0 customer. But the segment 0 customer is the first step in your ladder that allows you to find growth and traction. Without a segment 0 customer, you will never get to a segment 1 customer because you would not have the relevant history or track record or traction or testimonial. A segment 0 customer may not require any of these items. A segment 1 customer may. They may require a lot less than a mainstream customer, but they would still require some testimonial, some track record, some traction, some history. Segment 0 customer would not require any of these items, which generally indicates that they may be just as likely to be as desperate as you are. And if they have that high appetite for risk and they're just as desperate as you are, then there's also a reasonable chance that they are just as broke as you are. What do segment zero customers look like? They are not likely to be your ideal customer. It's just going to be a marriage of convenience. They'll simply open doors for you. Which then brings us to a very interesting question. What is the right timing? What is the right point? What is the right stage at which you should start thinking about your go-to-market strategy? Think about this for a second. On your product path, what is the right time to think about GTM? Is the right time at the start, when you haven't logged in? So this raises a really interesting question about the timing of the GTM exercise. You've built the entire product for your ideal customer profile, but your first customer, your segment zero customer, is actually not your ideal customer profile. And if it's not the same as your ideal customer profile, then obviously there are going to be differences. There are going to be deviations in terms of what they expect compared to the ideal customer profile, what they're willing to pay, their capacity to pay, the feature set that they're willing to work with. So if you already build the product, there's a reasonable chance that it may not be a good fit or a great fit for your segment zero customer, for your ICP, for your ideal customer profile, but it's not going to be a great fit for segment zero customers. If you build your product around your ideal customer profile, but that ideal customer profile is not the same as segment zero, there's a difference between the two of them, then do you think your product is going to be a good fit? If they're not the same, they would certainly want different features. Their ability to pay, capacity to pay, pricing power is going to be very different. Their expectations are going to be very different. Their expectations around your response time, your ability to turn around features, your ability to support them, even the in-house team that they have in place is going to be very different from the profile of your ideal customer. The go-to-market strategy needs to be factored in right at the start of your product design process, because product and GTM are not one and done. You don't build a product once, you don't do a GTM strategy once, you actually continue experimenting. And that experimentation keeps on changing the shape and form of the product that you're building and the plan around how you're going to get that product in front of customers and get them to try and buy it. While this sounds like a fairly simple exercise, a simple process, doesn't sound like rocket science at all, but there are still a number of common myths. Every time I sit down with a fresh team, with a new team of founders who've never done products before, and I ask them, what is your plan to get to your first customer? How will you find your first customer? The most common response, without fail, irrespective of where I am in the world, is a social media /network launch. I'm going to put this on my LinkedIn profile, share it on Insta or Facebook, or ask an influencer to post it. And as long as I have traffic, I will be able to generate my first few leads and qualify them and convert them. While that may be true for certain products, not true for all products, and it's unlikely to scale in a big way, especially when you're looking for segment zero customer. Second response, also most common response, is I've done a fairly detailed, in-depth customer segmentation analysis. I have a good sense of what my different customer personas look like, and I know what my customer zero is, and that's the customer I want to focus on. Could also be true, but that by itself is not enough. I'm a technology guy. I've sort of built the tech part of this, right? Now, to make sure that this product gets out in the market, I'm going to hire a marketing team. Or even better, because I have more money and I have a bigger budget, I'm actually going to go out and hire a product team. And then I'm going to get that product team to write a GTM plan. The worst of all possible myths, a launch event, a big launch event. We're going to do a big launch event, and that launch party, we'll explain what we're doing, and the world will come to that launch event and we'll find our customers. More sophisticated launch event would be going to allocate some test marketing spend to see whether the product is a good fit for the customer that we're trying to work with. Across all of these myths, a social network launch doesn't always work, has its own cost, has its own challenges, is very difficult to scale, especially at the initial startup /discovery/launch segment zero phase A stage. Customer segmentation by itself is not enough. There are actually a lot of additional work that you have to do beyond the initial segmentation analysis to deliver on this promise. Onboarding a marketing team tends to be a disaster when that team has not been around from the beginning. A separate product team that has a separate functional responsibility compared to the original technology product team also turns out to be a disaster. Writing a GTM plan by itself is no good if it's only written at the end of the product development life cycle. A launch event is a lecture by itself. Launch is not an event. Launch, just like GTM, is a process. It's a sequence of events, and you have to make sure that you plan it out. Just focusing everything on a singular launch event by itself is not going to be enough. Test marketing spend is possibly the best of all ideas, but then again, this test marketing is a function of when is it done. The success and failure of this test marketing spend is a function of when is that test marketing done. Did you do it right at the beginning when you could change the product profile and architecture and feature set, or did you do it right at the end after everything was locked in and done? So of all of these ideas or anti-patterns, which are the ideas that actually work? The idea that work is accepting the fact that go-to-market strategy is not getting one thing right. Go-to-market strategy is not a one and done exercise. Go-to-market strategy is a process. We have to accept the fact it's a process. That's what we said right at the beginning. We said GTM is a process. But there are other processes. So for example, I said, launch is a sequence, which means that launch is also a process. So if GTM is a process, what's the big deal about GTM? The big deal about GTM is a process with a feedback loop. You have to figure out whether the go-to-market strategy is working or not working. And if there is a feedback loop, then that also implies that there is some level of experimentation involved. And experimentation tends to be iterative. You try things and they fail, and you try something else again, which then suggests that you need time to run those experiments and run those iterations. But you also need capital and budget for that. And the right time to plan and allocate for all of this is right at the start. Right at the start of your product development exercise. So GTM is a process with a feedback loop. What is the process? The process is fairly simple. You validate for n is equal to 1. Now, when I say n is equal to 1, this is one customer, not segment, not a collection of customers. Validate for n is equal to 1. Make it work for one customer from segment 0. It doesn't matter whether you make money on that validation. Doesn't matter whether you make money on that first customer. Doesn't matter whether you make money with any customer in segment 0. What really matters is that you're validating the fact that the product is a good fit for the pain that it's trying to address and sort. And once you validate it for n is equal to 1, what's the next step? You increment n. You do n is equal to n plus 1. You add 1 to the n. So now you validate for 2, then 3, then 4, and you keep on repeating this process till you get to a point where the product is good enough for segment 1. The primary use of segment 0 customers is validation, traction, track record, testimonials, history, profile, and references. The primary use for segment 0 customers is not profitability. Primary use for segment 0 customers is to build a foundation for traction with segment 1 customers. How do you validate? You validate by getting out of the building. Steve Blank said this many years ago as part of his work with the Lean Startup Canvas. You have to get out of the building. You can't validate sitting behind your desk. You can't validate calling people on the phone. You can't validate running profiles and polls and campaigns on social media sites, you actually have to get out of the building. Get out of the building and meet people. Which people? Customers. Which customers? Segment 0 and segment 1 customers. When do you validate? You validate every single time you make an assumption. What do you validate? You validate the answers to these 4 questions. 4 fairly important questions. Who? Who is the customer? Why? Why are they buying my product? What? What is it exactly that they're buying? And where do I find them? So who is the customer? Remember our ad monetization product? Who's the ideal profile? The ideal profile is a customer that spends up to $100,000 on digital ad spend. But we've already spoken about the fact that that is not likely to be our segment 0 customer. So who is a segment 0 customer? Segment 0 customer is a customer that runs an ad campaign, does not have money to buy the fancy tools and products that exist for customers who buy up to $100,000 a month or a year in ad spend, but has a lot less available to spend on products. There'll most likely be a product that is going to be some combination of a freemium product, most likely a product that generates revenue once conversion is completed and the customer, your ad monetization customer, has actually generated revenue from the ad sale that he sent, and only then can he afford to pay you your fees. That's who. Why would buy the product? Because they can't afford anything else. What exactly are they buying? They're buying the same red carpet treatment that customers at $100,000 a month or year spent buy. The only problem is they can't afford to pay for that experience. So you have to figure out how to create that experience at a significantly lower cost. Where do you find them? And that's where we get stuck. Where do you find them is the question that tells you everything you need to know about how well do you understand who your customer is. Where do you find people who spend money on digital ad spend? Once you figure out how to answer that question, you can answer all the other questions that follow. If you can't answer the where question, you don't understand segment 0 well enough. But what's the purpose of this validation? The purpose of this validation is essentially to validate intent. This product that you're building for the customer that you're building for, does that customer actually has the intent to buy the product and to spend money on it? If he does not have the intent to buy, then doesn't matter how good or strong or well designed or well put together your product is, he is not going to buy it. And if he is not going to buy it, your second condition, remember, 2-part question right at the start that we asked. The objective of a GTM strategy is to get a product in front of customers and get them to try and buy it. So your product will get in front of the customers, they may try it, but if they can't or don't have the intent to buy, they're not going to buy. So the try and buy won't become a try and buy, it'll just stop at try, and your GTM strategy will fail. So what signals validation? How do you know that you validated the assumption? You have a thesis about the profile of a customer, where to find them, what they're willing to spend on it, what they're looking for. How do you find out that you've actually validated? The primary indicator of validation is your ability to establish a connection with a customer. And validation comes in many, many forms. The best validation is dollars in the bank. The customer takes out his wallet, takes out his credit card, and shares the detail with you so that you can send him an invoice for $100 or $1,000 or $100,000. That's the best validation. Short of that validation, I'd also settle for a testimonial. What's the indication? What's the evidence of a connection? For a book, for example, testimonials. I wrote a book, people wrote testimonials. I wish I'd met Jawad when I was 14 years old. I would have saved me a fortune in bad debt, student debt, and therapy bills. Right? Relevant, easy to read, and provocative. This book is a keeper that'll stay on my shelf. My best buy of 2020. Why would somebody say that to you? They would say that to you if they were friends, if they owe you a favor, if you asked them to write it for you. But a random reader, why would a random reader say, I wish I'd met Jawad when I was 14 years old? Or you can either do an MBA, run 2 startups, have a dozen business leaders as mentor, or you can pick up this book and read it cover to cover. It's a book of life hacks for founders. Highly recommended reading. A testimonial is an indication that your customer read the book, used the product, enjoyed the experience enough to share feedback, and feedback, for all practical purposes, is a gift. Beyond testimonials is a more important question, and that question is, what comes before testimonials? What comes before testimonials is trials. How do you get to trials? You get to trials by building trust. So again, go back to segment 0. So segment 0, customer is as desperate, as broke, as poor, as hungry as you are. They don't have a choice. They can't afford the $100,000 a month solution. So they're happy to give you a try, because as long as you can do something for them and it is an improvement of what they're doing right now, they will most likely take it. But think in terms of a segment 1 customer. A segment 1 customer requires some element of trust. What are the components of trust that they rely on? To understand trust, you have to take a step back. Think of trust as a river. Every time you engage with a customer, every time you have an interaction with a customer, you add to the flow. And as the flow increases, the size or the breadth or the depth of the river also increases. But trust is also a feedback loop. Trust builds every single time you run through the loop. So as long as you're running through the loop, as long as you're engaging and you're conversing and you're receiving feedback and acting on that feedback on behalf of your customers, you're building trust. Ultimately, you build trust to a point where you're able to establish a connection. Now, a connection is a very overused, cliched word. But what does a connection involve in the product world between a customer and the product owner? Connection is a function of your ability to understand that your customer has a path. Your customer has a life arc. That life arc leads to dreams. That life arc leads to gains that they're seeking, wants and needs that they have, pains that they're suffering as customers. And the whole point of the life arc is to help them figure out the answers to these elements. A large part of these elements are driven by their ambitions, by their aspirations, and by their dreams. Now, what is your role on that arc? What is the role your product plays on that arc? Are you just a guide, a passive guide? Look on the left side, look on the right side, see the sides. Are you a fellow traveler who's also going through or is undergoing the same journey and have something to share that they would find of use? Are you selling vitamin pills that will not necessarily help reduce the pain but sort of help them perform better? Or are you actually selling painkillers that will kill the pain? Which part of this arc do you fit in? Do you just fit in at the start? Do you fit in at the end? Or do you stay with them throughout? Do you just take care of dreams and gains but not wants and needs and pains? Or do you take care of all of it? You have to go back to what we said earlier. You have to understand customers. How do you understand customers? You understand customers by conversing and engaging with them, and by looking at the feedback that they're sharing with you, and then acting on that feedback so that they accept the fact that what they tell you is in front of somebody who acts on it. This product owner and this product was essentially designed for me. And once I accept the fact that this product was designed for me as a customer, then the conversion conversation and the conversion process is fairly easy. Now, there are other elements that help us build trust. There are other components that help us build trust. The reason why we're emphasizing so much on trust is because trust leads to trial, trials lead to conversions. If we understand the process of trust, then the GTM strategy essentially is a trust building strategy. How do you build trust? Outside of the connection, the engagement, the conversation and feedback, what are other drivers of trust that make a difference? One big driver is reference. Most of the biggest deals that I've closed in my life were warm introductions or warm references. Who do you know in common who's tried your product and would be happy to give your customer a call? Say, these guys are good guys. This is a great product. It changed my life. You should give it a try. That's one. But reference by itself is not enough. I think a second big component is fit. What does your product do? If the fit is, it's a nice to have, conversion is going to be hard. If the product is a painkiller, I have a massive migraine or I fractured my toe, and when I took this pill, it sort of solved all of my problems in one go. Third component is contact. I have a great reference, I have a good fit, but if it's a large ticket item, even if it's a small ticket item, it helps if I've met you or I've seen you or we've had some element of engagement or conversation or feedback between ourselves. What does that do? What does contact do? Contact adds to trust, and trust leads to trials. Final part is stupidity. The biggest stumbling block is stupidity. The biggest stumbling block that customers face when they have to make a decision with respect to whether they would, should, or are or not going to try a product is stupidity. And this is not stupidity in a generic sense. This is stupidity in a very specific sense. Will I look stupid if I try this product? Can you give an honest answer to that question? Can you ensure that you've reduced the risk of post-trial regret, buyer's remorse on my part? What have you done to make sure that I, your customer, would not regret this at the end of the trial? How do you ensure that your customers actually look great? They look as like the smartest people in the room post-trial. I would say it's time to revisit the question that we asked earlier. Go-to-market. What exactly is it and how do you go about doing that? Go-to-market is understanding a few things. Go-to-market is understanding the product life cycle. How do products behave? Within that life cycle, there is a first part, an important part, the discovery part, the launch part. Go-to-market is essentially focused on understanding how do you tackle the segment 0 challenge. How do you convert these customers? How do you get these customers to buy your product when you have no traction, no background, no history, no track record? A large part of that is understanding their profile, which then suggests that a go-to-market strategy cannot happen at the end, has to happen right at the beginning. And it doesn't stop at the beginning, it's core part of your product development life cycle. The ultimate objective of these three components, understanding the profile of segment 0, understanding the timing, understanding the life cycle of products, suggests that go-to-market is a process. What is that process based on? That process is based on getting the product in front of customers and then ideally getting them to try and buy it. But try is a function of trials. And how do we get to trial? We only get to trial if we can build a relationship of trust with our customers. And when we bring all of these components together, what does that lead to? It leads to the fact that a good conversion, an ultimate sale, an ultimate relationship with a customer is based on our ability to establish a connection with them. So if you've written a go-to-market strategy and you want to evaluate whether that go-to-market strategy is effective, is accurate, does it do all of the things that you want it to do, take a look at these elements and ask yourself whether you've answered these questions. If these questions are too broad, ask yourself more specific questions. Specific questions like, who will be your first customer? Don't talk to me about your target segment. Tell me who will be your first customer. What do they look like? Why will they trust or try your product? How will you connect and engage with them? Where will you find them? How do you validate segment 0 and who comes after segment 0? Take a very simple example. You're a physician, you're a cardiologist. Where will you find cardiac patients? You've just moved to a new country. You want to practice medicine. You're licensed to practice medicine, but nobody knows you. Where will you go to find patients? If you're interested in fishing, where do you go fishing? You fish where the fishes are. So from a customer segment perspective, from a go-to-market perspective, where do you want to fish? You want to fish where the fishes are. Where will you find cardiac patients? Most likely in a cardiac hospital. So sign up at the cardiac hospital as a consulting physician so that you can get walk-in and referral patients from the hospital. Patients who don't have the time to wait to see a physician who's booked 6 months in advance and are happy to see a physician who can look at them and talk to them and answer them and advise them, guide them, possibly even treat them if you could establish a connection with them based on your own bedside manners. So now that we sort of created this structure, let's take a look at a few very brief, very short case studies. As an academic, I think the most important aspect, more likely aspect for us is actually not a technology product, is actually either an article, a publication, or a book. What would be a go-to-market strategy for a book? When I speak to most professors in my circle of friends and colleagues and peers, their general expectation is, I've written the book. Now I'm going to talk to ORIC, which is the Office of Research and Innovation and Commercialization, and ORIC will place this book for me. And if the book is not placed with an agent or a publisher, then it is ORIC's fault. Does that sound right? Sort of on the money? But how would a go-to-market strategy for a book work if you were a founder? If you're a professor who was also a founder, you're thinking in terms of, I'm going to look at this book project as a founder and treat this as a product. First question you have to ask yourself is, what's the theme of the book? Who are you writing for? Are you writing for yourself so that people will say, oh, I'm an author and I've written a book? Or are you writing for a specific audience? And if you're writing for that specific audience, what is it that the book offers to that specific audience? Where's the fit? Is it a vitamin pill or a pain reliever? And, how do you handle this? Would I look stupid if I bought this book and read it? How do you address the free trial question? So I've done a few books, and of the ones that I wrote, I'm going to look at 3 specific examples. My first book, Reboot, is the book that sort of became the foundation of my base as an author. But when was Reboot written? Reboot was written in 2006. Who was the audience? It was essentially founders. Why did I write it? As a founder, I had failed, and I had found that there were hardly any books that focused or talked about failure, especially failure by founders that came from a South Asian origin. There were lots of books on success. There were lots of books on raising money, lots of books on doing well, lots of books on success stories. But a lot of those books, a lot of those stories, a lot of those tomes were focused on success, or were focused on founders that were not South Asians. So my primary audience were people who were interested in failure, because my take was that 95% of the startups fail, only 5% of the ones succeed. I thought there would be more of an interest on people like me who failed and wanted to read more about failure than focus on learning about success. And to boot, focus on founders that came from a South Asian background. So the book worked, did very well, and that's the reason why a lot of my handles actually start with the title Reboot Dude. How did I address the reach problem? How did I go about finding customers who would read my book? I spoke at conferences. So the Indus Entrepreneurs, or TIE, Open, the Organization for Pakistani Entrepreneurs Network, product conferences, mentoring teams focused on the product/startup side, working actively for 14-15 years as an advisor or a mentor or a guide or a coach, especially on the pitching side for founders. That's how I found them. Did I run a social campaign? I did. Did that social campaign generate a lot of sales? No, it did not. So if you look at the hierarchy or the structure that we spoke about earlier, there are multiple myths with respect to what you could possibly do, but not all of the options that you explore as part of those myths are effective. Reboot was a book that focused not on my specialty, but on my experiences. I actually wrote multiple books after that. The most interesting of those became 2 textbooks that I published with Macmillan. Macmillan is one of the leading global textbook publishers. How did I end up with a deal with Macmillan while being based in Pakistan? And that too, a deal on a textbook on a very competitive field. Interesting, intersectional field, but still a very competitive field called computational finance. How did I land that contract? Once again, if you go back to the structure, what is the structure? The structure is theme, audience, fit, pain relievers, and free trials. The theme in this specific case was derivative pricing. Who was the audience? People who wanted to understand derivative pricing, but more importantly, wanted to build models on derivative pricing. Were there not other textbooks that covered derivative pricing and model building? There were. But there was one big challenge. The big challenge was that most derivative pricing models essentially were fairly involved and complicated partial differential equations. So understanding that or building models around that was a challenge. What we did, or what I did, was we converted that process into a simpler, easier to follow, easy to understand, layman process that will allow you to build the same model. Convert that partial differential equation into a simple Excel spreadsheet. Our book wasn't meant for everybody. It was essentially meant for people who needed to build these models in a hurry and did not have the relevant background to evaluate or read or work or understand with a partial difference. How did we reduce the risk of not looking stupid? Why would you want to buy a book by a guy based in Karachi with a name called Jawad Ahmed Fareed? Why would you buy a book from that person on a field on competition finance? How would you reduce that risk? How would you reduce the risk of not looking stupid? When I did model that work was not as successful as Reboot, mainly because it was meant at a much smaller audience and it was priced much higher. I think Reboot retailed for about $9. Model at Work retails for about $80. There's a difference of about 10 times. Even that 10x differential in pricing would handle or take care of a lot of the elasticity that you see here on the pricing side. But it's a steady seller. I've been receiving my royalty checks on Models at Work now for about 10 plus years. It's been in print for 10 plus years. But then Models at Work led to the next one, which was Founders Puzzles, because Models at Work focused on the computational finance side. I felt as I worked with founders, because of the work I'd done on Reboot, I felt that there was a need to simplify basic financial modeling for founders on the same side, on the same theme. And essentially, Model at Work became Founders Puzzle. How did that happen? This book focused on building models on the financial institution, financial services, financial market side. This book used the same structure, the same theme, the same mindset of simplifying things to a point where a founder with zero background in accounting and finance could put together a thinking model for his own use that would help him figure out product strategy for his product, for the market or the segment that he was working in. So books are easy, right? Books make a lot of sense. Books sort of are structured. Books are organized. Books are not technology. How would you do a GTM strategy for a SaaS product? How would that work? The structure is still the same. Who's your audience? How do you get to that audience? My first startup, Avicina, the book Reboot focuses on Avicina, something that I did between 1999 and 2001, started off as a venture that focused on teaching corporate finance to the world. The biggest breaks that we got were through warm references. What did we focus on? We focused on a specific pain that our audience faced. And 20 years ago or 25 years ago, free trials were not as common. So we just went all in with free trials. Reduce the risk of our customers looking stupid. 10 years later, started a company called Alchemy Technologies that focused on selling risk systems to banking customers. Again, building upon the base of the work I'd done as a teacher, trainer, instructor, model builder. The reducing the risk of stupidity and increasing our credibility as a team, as an organization, as a consultant, as an advisor, as a vendor. Rather than selling software, we actually started training our customers on the problems that needed to be solved. And that training essentially created a credibility loop that kept on helping us upselling the product that we were trying to build. Primary focus, once again, was using a pain reliever. So in all of these instances, I think the primary driver, when with Avicenna, the reference was with who? With people who mattered to our target segment, to our segment 0. With Alchemy, the training was focused on what? Training was actually focused on end users and decision makers in the field so that we could build that relationship to a point where they'd say, okay, I'm happy to buy the product that you've designed and created. Our conversation around go-to-market, we've presented a framework. We've presented maybe 2 or 3 different examples of how go-to-market actually works in the amount of time that I was given, which is about 60 minutes. If you'd like to learn more about this approach, both around go-to-market, around the product strategy, around product development, I wrote a book last year called Craft that's likely to come out in print by May 2025. The thesis of the book is very simple. The thesis of the book is not all customers are created equal. And some customers will never appreciate your contribution. It's not personal, it's just a question of fit. And that's the central thesis of the book. The presentation that you saw today, if you'd like to learn more about some of the core topics and concepts, there are multiple books that help me understand these themes across years. I think the most important one was Design and Marketing of New Products by Glenn Urban, who was the Dean of Sloan School of Management at MIT. Why Information Goes is a more recent book by Cesar Hidalgo, also from MIT, but now a professor in Europe. Eat People by Andy Kessler, venture investor, technologist, ex-Bell Lab employee. Stephen Johnson on Where Good Ideas Come From, on innovation. Blockbusters, a great book, out of print, unfortunately, very hard to find, on the stories behind why certain products did so well and others did not. Start at the End by Matt Wallert, Build by Tony Fadell, and then more importantly, Microsoft Secrets, the first book that I read about the product mindset. Thank you very much for your time and patience. My name is Jawad Ahmed Fareed. It was a pleasure giving you an overview, an honest heart-to-heart chat as a serial founder on the product side. I teach product development as a professor of practice at IBA Karachi. I have an MBA from Columbia Business School, an undergrad degree in computer science from Fast Newsys, Pakistan's first pure computer science school, all the way back from 1985, and I am a fellow Society of Actuaries. If you have a question, drop me a line at jawad@financetradingcourse.com or look me up on LinkedIn.